Pie Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem. Pie Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem.
Yep. Welcome to Under the Basement Steps. And this video is all the sins revealed of the 2019 Openers Open. And believe me, there's a lot of sins to reveal. First off, basically, well, technically, I managed to do this challenge and successfully by the letter of the challenge. It was a big failure. I'll let you. If you watched the video, you noticed you didn't see the opener very much. That's because I'm not very proud of it, but you're gonna see it here. So what I was trying to replicate to partially is this opener. This is a Craftsman. It's a wrench. That's a bottle opener, and I just wanted this part of it, this round part. It's got a bulge in the center. It's got two little ear type things down here where it hooks under the bottle cap. And I wanted this part, but I wanted it smaller to hold it in the hand and pop it open. That's what I was going for with the pattern I made and what I wanted to cast out of bronze. Yeah, what I got is kind of a wonderful bronze. Actually, this way. This is what it is. Notice that's only about half the size. Only a half round instead of fully round. Yeah, that's because of the major problem. It was a short pour. I grossly miscalculated the amount of metal I needed and ended up with, I don't know if that will focus, with this thing. Which, here's the big sin, didn't work. Yeah, the eagle-eyed of you would maybe notice that when I'm opening that bottle of beer, that's not what I'm using. I'm using this, which the night before, Thursday night, had to cut out of the metal from the riser of this cast. Yeah, I ran out of time to redo it. I was having problems. I actually molded that thing up about 3 or 4 times, and you saw actually in the video that's two separate rammings of the mold. So yeah, I was having issues, which will all be revealed here. First, a little bit of background. When, I guess his name's Perry, SW Dweeb, put forth the challenge, my shop was in moving boxes in my garage. I had recently moved and hadn't unpacked it yet. And so his challenge was the kick in the pants I needed to get going on doing that. I had done foundry work in the past a little bit. I worked in an iron foundry one summer while I was in college. That was owned by my next door neighbor. Was third generation. He's since passed away. It's a family business. The fifth generation runs it now, or works there. Fourth and fifth are there. I took casting in college, but it's been a long time since I tried to make anything useful. Normally I just play with fire and make some ingots that got stacked up and not used for anything. So I had to build a whole new foundry from scratch before I actually could get started making the pattern and trying to make the opener itself, which is why I was running out of time at the end, because this was the last part of it, actually, the opener. I had to build a furnace, molding flasks, molding sand, riddles, rammer, all that stuff had to get built, and then it didn't really have time to get tested before you saw in the video. So I'm going to go through some of that, and let's take a look. Okay, so the first thing I did was make a new furnace. So I've made a separate video of that you can check out if you'd like. Next, I made molding flasks, and maybe it's because I've worked in a commercial foundry, but a lot of the home founders I've seen on YouTube, I've always been a bit disappointed with their molding flasks. They seem kind of like an afterthought for their setups. So I took my inspiration from something I remember seeing called a Adams snap flask. A snap flask is a specific type of flask where it has hardware where it sort of expands after you ram it up, and you can remove the flask, and then you just, when you pour, it's just the sand, and you use one flask over and over, and you get dozens and dozens of molds out of it, as opposed to having one set of molding flasks per mold. Mine doesn't snap, but it's built in the same way, based on the same way as an Adams snap flask, where it has grooves in the wood to help key the sand in. It has steel on the top and the bottom, so they don't get abraded and wear away. Also, it gives something where you can, if you need to tilt or put a hot crucible on it to make the pour, it doesn't instantly burst into flames. What I was really proud of was my alignment hardware. It's just made out of a couple pieces of angle iron, a few bolts with the heads ground off, held in place with nuts. That worked really good. I have to keep the nuts slightly slack on mine because I don't have really accurate machine tools to get the holes to line up. But they're close enough. They actually work better when they've been rammed up because they're heavier and they'll slide together and apart smoother than when they're empty when I was testing them. After the molding flasks, I made a few other odds and ends. I made a couple of bottom boards, made a riddle, made a pattern for ingots, and a couple of little frames. Those were just going to be open sand molds. I made a hand rammer out of just some 2x4 scrap. You may have seen in there, I did have a pneumatic rammer that I made about a year and a half ago, maybe, out of a needle scaler from Harbor Freight. I found a video somewhere on YouTube, modified it a little bit from that video because I was having a few problems with it not holding together. It's basically a long bolt with a couple of grade 8 nuts on it that replace the needle part of the needle scaler. But they kept backing off, so I actually just super glued them together, I think, and like the jam nuts, and it's held together pretty good. It doesn't work as well as a professional one. If you go to the channel Sand Rammer, he just did a video all about rammers, and this one worked okay. The last of the kind of preliminary foundry building steps I had to do was make up my molding sand. I'm just doing green sand casting. The sand just came from a big box, and it's probably came out of a river type environment. It's not the real nice bright white sand you get, like frack sand, if you know what that looks like. I had to screen it several times to get everything down to size. Probably from a 40-pound bag of sand, I probably got, 35 pounds out of it. The rest was too big, even though it had been sort of screened already. The clay came from Wally World. They have a brand of kitty litter that's just bentonite clay. Comes in a green and blue bag. It costs like 97 cents for 7 pounds. It is in little chunks. You do have to grind it up, and I'm not going to tell you how I did that because someone, I'm not going to name any names, is going to get pissed off at me if she finds out what I did with her really expensive blender. And I only mixed that up the night before I cast, so it didn't really have time to work in well. I got one comment saying, "Wow, that sand looks really wet, really dark." But the sand starts off dark to start with. It seemed to be moisture-wise just about right. I may have gotten it a little heavy because I had some problems later on with the parting powder. I was just using talc. It stuck. It didn't part. It did the opposite and made kind of a crust. So I may have had it too wet. I also may have had talcum powder that has cornstarch in it, which would lead to that as well. I'm going to have to look into that before my next project. Okay, so once I was done with all the foundry building, I was able to finally start on the pattern work for the opener itself. I started with my core box because for whatever reason I decided I had more confidence in my ability to make a pattern fit a core than a core fit a pattern. Go figure. So here's the box. This is just half of it. Of course, two halves go together. I needed a round cross section that would fit into the pattern, make that round hole in that bottle opener. And then the square part at top was just to anchor it so it wouldn't move. Because if you just make it round, it could shift around and slide further into the pattern and make it too thin. So I built that first. I would do it differently if I do it again, which I probably will do it again because I'm going to keep going until this turns out. Maybe not right away, but I will get that bottle opener that I saw in my head. I fabricated it out of little pieces of wood. I would probably, especially the top square part, I would probably just take solid pieces and cut the profile on my router table. I didn't do that. I don't know why I didn't do that. There were problems with the core box. It's much too rough inside. The core sand, which was just my green sand and kind of a paste binder, flour and cornstarch boiled up in water. Very sticky. It wouldn't release. It was too rough. In fact, what I ended up doing was with all the leftover sand, because I mixed way too much up, I turned it into basically a little loaf and baked it in a toaster oven. You bake cores like that often. And it came out of the oven rock hard, and it looked really good, but so I kind of machined it on my belt sander. Unfortunately, it shrunk inside, like the outside formed a crust like a loaf of bread, and you cut open a loaf of bread and it's full of big bubbles, you know? Yeah, it was kind of like that. Disappointing. I did get enough to make the cores. I could make the round piece. I could make a square piece. A little short on the square piece, but that didn't really matter all that much. I just backfilled with green sand and it stuck in place. It was two pieces. I had to literally use wood glue and glue them together, which when I worked in the foundry, the iron foundry, sometimes I would make cores when we were slow in the pattern shop, which is where I worked. That doesn't say much with how this stuff looks. And there were times where we would glue cores together, and so that wasn't unusual. So for the pattern itself, it's a split pattern. Got it here, take it apart. So you have the red would be the bronze itself, and the yellow is the core print. And these holes are for I had a couple of little steel dowel pins that I put in to hold it together. The wooden dowel pins were the first attempt. They didn't line up, so they just got filled in with that dowel and little nails glued in. It's all right. I wasn't happy. It's not the best quality on the parting line. But I figured in the end I was running out of time and that wouldn't really matter because nothing else was quality on this build. So I let it go instead of fussed over it. I think it would have worked. If I worked well enough, let's say, had I had enough metal. I don't know how well it's going to show up. You can see, maybe if it'll focus. I did get the core worked. I did get a depression in here. There's a little dome that the bottle pivots on and undercut where those little ears that stuck out were. Those were both carved into the core, the little dome, and a couple little scratches in the side to make the little ears. I'm calling them little prongs on the bottle opener. You can see except for this part where it ran, that raised ridge, which corresponds to that raised red part that would have been a ring with the core. So that was working. And it came down to running out of metal. I miscalculated badly. I should have doubled it. I did it in grams. I had 600 grams, so that's a little over a pound. And I thought I would have enough, and I didn't. I don't know if my gating system was a lot bigger than I expected it to be. I don't think it was. I think I just messed up big time. The alloy, this is bronze. It's a tin bronze. It's 14% tin, the rest copper. I really like it. It looks really good. I mean, the finish is crap. Let's get back to that. It looks like the surface of the stinking moon on there. I don't know if I had my sand too wet. I probably did, because when you mix it up, you can call it tempering, where basically it hydrates the clay and the sand, everything binds together. And mixing it up the night before, it probably didn't have time to do that. So when I would squeeze it and it finally came together and held its shape and it broke cleanly like you want green sand to do, it was probably too wet because it didn't have time to temper. I should have left it a little dry, and if I had time, wait a couple days, mix it a little bit every day, and then test it and make sure it's right. So my sand probably was off. Like I mentioned earlier, the parting powder I used was just talcum powder. I think it might have had cornstarch because I just bought the cheapest stuff I could. It did say it had talc, but I don't know if it had anything else. That acted more like a glue between the cope and the drag. Though the patterns themselves did release pretty good, but it was the rest of the sand interface, the parting line, kind of stuck, and that sucked. When it came to the melt itself, everything went fairly well. I didn't have any problems with the copper melting down. It went pretty quick and was very clean. Wasn't a lot of dross or whatever, slag, whatever you call it, with copper on there. But I started with pretty clean copper scrap, so that would eliminate that. I had a little bit of an issue when I went to add the tin, which was at the very end of the melt because it has such a lower melting point than the copper. I, for whatever stupid reason, had it in a plastic bucket, and when I got up there, I realized, like, well, if I just hold this bucket and dump it in, this thing's gonna melt or catch on fire. So I did lose a few little pieces of tin as I was adding it in. I'd still say my alloy is probably 13.8% or higher. I really didn't lose much at all. I did have a little problem with the burner. There was maybe, I don't know what you'd call it, like a back pressure, where the furnace would kind of make a chugging noise. You'd get a lot of flame back out of the tweer around the burner. Every now and then it would build up a harmonic of that, almost like a pulse jet engine, if you know what that kind of looks and sounds like. That would last for a few seconds and then it would sort of work itself out. And I don't know if I have the exhaust at the top of the furnace too choked down with the lid, the size of the hole in the lid. I'll just have to look at that and try to figure out a better way. Forced air, I understand, would eliminate that forced air propane burner, but I don't have one yet. So yeah, that was the sins of the 2019 Openers Open. I went to make this. I made this. I'm not sure you could call it a bottle opener. given its lack of ability to open a bottle. But from the same batch of metal, the same cast from the riser, I did machine this thing, which has opened several times now, a bottle of beer. And so technically, I succeeded in the opener's open. Oh well. I got more projects coming up. If you want to stay tuned and think, oh, well, he's a liar, but at least he came honest about it. See you later.